Good morning, EDF students. I am recording this for you on Saturday, April 1st, April Fool's Day, as my daughter has already reminded me. This is me on a Saturday. I have not showered yet. My hair is not fixed. I look like I just got out of bed. I didn't. I woke up at like 7. It's 9 o'clock now, but I need to record this video for you guys and get this done, and I'm not going to shower first for a video that you would probably rather see the real me anyway. You guys get to see me like halfway decent every week as it is. The purpose of this video is to go over this handout that I gave out in class, this handout, on Wednesday night of last week. If you remember, at the end of class, we talked about how we will not be having class on Monday, even though I really wanted to, because my husband won tickets to go see the practice round of the Masters, yada yada. So we're going to talk this through. It'll probably take somewhere like maybe 7 minutes-ish for this video, and then we'll talk about your next steps. So your assignment this week is to watch this video. We're going to talk through this handout together, and then there'll be a little activity for you to do that's going to have a point value on it, because I had scheduled to give you a pointed assignment in class that day, or there were going to be points for coming to class that night. And then we'll talk about your third reflection. So before we jump in, reflection number 2 is open. And by now, if you've looked at it, then you've already read that the 2 questions for reflection number 2 were about effective schools, and I just completely drew a blank. I can see it in my brain. Anyway, when you read the instructions, it'll be a topic that we've discussed that I specifically pointed out in class, which of course now I can't remember, probably because it's Saturday. Saturdays are for yoga pants and t-shirts and not taking showers if you so choose. At least in my world they are. So the third reflection question is going to be about this topic, about organization of schools. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. If you take a look at this handout that I gave you in class, and I'm going to attach it to the video, to the Canvas thing as well, so that if you missed getting it, because a couple of you left early, you can download it, but it is front to back. So we're going to start with this side right here. Okay, and I'm going to see if I can adjust this a little bit so maybe we can see it better. Okay, now if I look at this little handout, it says organization of schools at the top, and this 2-page deal starts with high level right here, and then on the back it looks at specifically a school level. So when I'm looking at this, I start up here with the federal government. For me, it's easier to think big and narrow down to small. You could also look at this as kind of like a backward thing where you start with the school and go to the district and stuff like that. But if we start with the federal government, which I wrote on there, you have your presidential, judicial, and legislative branches. Just for those of us who have already forgotten American government that we were all required to take in 12th grade. There are decisions made at the federal government that affect education. Education still remains today primarily a state-by-state institution, which means that most of the decisions in Florida made for our education system are made at the state level. So when there's big changes, it usually comes from our in-state legislature. And right now, they're in session. Pardon me. For those of us who have grown up in Tallahassee, there's a time of year that we call session. And it's when all the senators, all the state senators and House of Representatives are here. And it's when Tallahassee seems a little busier, traffic is a little heavier. And if you try to go downtown on a weekday, specifically Monday through Thursday during session, it's really hard to find a parking spot because there's so many more people here. Because they don't come alone. It's not like it's just the senators and representatives. It's all their aides and their staff and lobbyists come to town, and it gets really busy. So when they make big changes, like recently, or I guess maybe like 4 years ago now, they made a big change to the way college works, where some students had to take developmental education courses when they came into the college if they didn't test into college classes, and it didn't matter how well they did in high school. Like everyone who came to TCC had to take that test, and if you didn't pass with a certain score, you would take developmental reading, writing, or math, depending on where you were. The law for that changed several years ago, so that's the kind of rules that they make at the state level. That wasn't a federal law. Federal law, and there's an example right here, decisions made include goals for the country. So Brown versus Board of Education, which is probably the most famous education decision of all time, up until now anyway, that was a federal Supreme Court case. It started out small, but this is the case that started like desegregation. So, and then the other example that's right there, No Child Left Behind. This is one that you guys have absolutely heard of before. George W. Bush did No Child Left Behind, and his whole initiative was to say, we're going to test our students starting in third grade. This should sound familiar. We're going to test our students starting in third grade to make sure that they're proficient in reading and math. And if they're not proficient in reading, we're going to give them more time to catch up. And there were huge goals with No Child Left Behind. And there was all this stuff like, by this year, whatever year it was, I can't remember, we are going to be 100% proficient in reading and math at this level and this level. And what happened with No Child Left Behind is we started with this idea, and it added and added and added. And this No Child Left Behind is really kind of a big reason why we have standardized testing in third grade through 10th grade. And it is the reason why we have, if third graders don't pass, then they repeat third grade. I need to make a note right now because I want to look up to see if that law changed when they switched to FSA. I don't think it did, but I need to confirm. FSA. Okay, I'll look that up later. But when you guys were in school, that was the law when you were in elementary school in Florida. And it wasn't just Florida. That was something that the federal government pushed through with No Child Left Behind. So when the federal government makes a decision like this and they say this is the way it's going to be, the states have to comply and they have to file reports and things like that to prove that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And the entity that submits that evidence to the federal government is the state. So the state legislature kind of comes down from the federal government. The federal government makes these decisions, and then we have our state legislature. Like I said, they're in session right now. And they're the people who interpret the federal law, decide if we're going to make, how we're going to apply the federal law in Florida. And then they decide if we're going to make any additions or if there's anything that's important for our state that we need to address and how we might add in some other things. So in Florida, it says right here, the state legislature creates laws that include meeting the federal criteria and adding the state's own requirements. In Florida, they decide how we will improve low-performing schools, goals for student performance, and criteria for licensing teachers, and the steps to earn a high school diploma. There's lots of stuff. This stuff is all written in the state code. So if you go to like Florida Sunshine Online, that's the state statutes right there. And you can search under the education statutes and you can read all this stuff. Like it's all written in legal language, what a student has to do to graduate from a public high school in Florida. And the state sets the tone. And it's something like 24 credits and some, they have to have a PE and they have to have this, this, and this, and this. And all that criteria was laid out for you at your public high school. So you've seen this before. It's not a mystery to you. So not only that, but if you decide to become a licensed or a certified teacher in Florida, then you'll go through whatever process the state has in place for you to get your certification. Usually, and this is very normal, it's not just for Florida, usually it's a process where you submit your test scores, you submit your transcript so that it proves that you graduated, and they might send you a letter that says you have your temporary certification, as soon, notify us when you get a job, and then the ball will start rolling for some other things. The state legislature sets goals for school improvement. In Florida, we grade our schools. You've probably seen this before too. Some of you might have gone to a school where maybe you were in A school and your community published that in your newspaper. Or maybe you went to schools that were C's, D's, or F's. It probably was still published in the newspaper, but maybe not with as much of a bragging right kind of thing. If you go to an F school in Florida, the parents or the school is required to send your parents a letter that says your child is enrolled in a school that earned a grade of F. You have the legal option to send your kid to another school in your district that earned a C or better. So there's rules and things that have to do with school improvement and also how it affects how it affects students and families. And those rules come from the state legislature, and it's all written in the law. You could print it out, read it in the bathtub or something. I've read it because it used to be my job. Okay, so that's the legislature makes these decisions. it's important to note the legislature doesn't actually do any work beyond this. They decide what our law in Florida is going to say and how it's going to read, and they decide changes on it, and they discuss it, and they vote on it, and they listen to people in their districts and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, once they've made all these decisions for the education law in Florida, it goes to the State Department of Education, which for us is FDOE, the Florida Department of Education. The DOE's job is to be the people who kind of, police is kind of too strong of a word, but they're the ones who implement all these requirements. They are the entity that teachers, parents, people like me and you, if we have questions, we can contact DOE and ask those questions. If we have an opinion, we can contact DOE and file that opinion, like maybe it's an opinion about the law, and their answer will be the same every time, and it is, these decisions are made by the state legislature. Please contact your local representatives. So I know because I used to have to write those letters. The State Department only exists to implement, monitor, and in some cases enforce or make recommendations to the legislature. Things like, this school has failed so many times, and now we need to decide if they're going to lose funding or if they're going to be taken over by a private company. I mean, that's very rare that happens. There's one county in Florida that has been under the gun for a long time. We'll talk about that in class, remind me. But the State Department, their job is to incorporate the policies so that they're easy to understand. So the policies are written into law. Laws are not always easy to read. They're not written in everyday language that we speak in. They're written in a very formal way. A semicolon means something different in Florida in state statute than it does like in a book. It literally can mean like or it can mean, I'm not going to get into all that. I will stop right there. That's a tangent. So basically, the DOE exists to answer questions for people who might not understand how to interpret the law. And they answer questions to school districts, which is, superintendent on down. They answer questions for parents, and sometimes they answer questions for students, because certainly we have young people who learn to advocate for themselves and who reach out directly. But it's very important to note that when you're a teacher, it's really easy to fall into the place where it's like, DOE is bad. In Florida, that big white building downtown where the DOE is housed is nicknamed the Ivory Tower. And there's a lot of assumptions, like the people that work there don't get it. A lot of the people that work there are actually former teachers, so they do get it. And they're not necessarily on the side of the public schools. In my personal experience, that is not true. Most of the people at the state, I shouldn't generalize, but there is a lot more sympathy than is necessarily assumed. They are not your enemy. They exist to help understand and monitor what's going on in Florida, because we have to report back up. So every month there's this big state level school board meeting, and there is a state superintendent in Florida. And every month when they have that meeting, all the different departments in the DOE compile a report about what they've been doing, and it kind of gets like filed up. So if there's 12 different divisions or 30 different bureaus, they all make a report. It goes into this big, huge binder, and they have like a giant meeting with people who talk about the state of education in Florida, and it gets filtered up to the legislature, and then eventually information has to get reported to the feds. So I hope that made sense. But these are all the people that make decisions about what happens in schools, and they don't work in schools every day. So, and I know that you already know this, like conceptually, you get this. You understand that there's things that happen in schools that have absolutely zero input from the people that work in schools every day, in the sense that they're decisions who are being made by people who work in offices and buildings somewhere else, and who are looking not necessarily a child in the eyes, but who are looking at the data and trying to match together the human part of education and the legal, what we have to do part of education. And it is not always easy. It's very easy for people like us to get angry about people who make these decisions, but the truth is they're trying really hard too. They're in many cases doing the best they can. Are there people out there that don't care about kids? Absolutely. But I think for the most part, there's a sense of caring, and there's also a sense of, but we have to do what we have to do to keep moving forward. All right. If you flip over, this is the back of your sheet. And this looks at a breakdown of a school district. So now we're looking at local level. We're kind of taking away, we've looked at federal government and state legislature and then the Department of Education. Once we get to a district, and I'm coming here with the state DOE, under the DOE, who are the employees who implement legislative policy and monitor school districts. In Florida, we have 67 counties, and we have 67, our system is that every county has their own school district. We don't have city schools in Florida, we just have county schools. We have a few more districts than that because there are some schools that are special circumstances that are their own district. So like Florida State University Developmental Research School, known in Tallahassee as Florida High, that they are their own district. So they're completely run on their own. They have nothing to do with Leon County. FAMU Developmental Research School in Tallahassee, FAMU DRS, they are completely their own school district. And there's a couple other like that in Florida. So we maybe have technically like 74 school districts, but all the ones beyond the 67 that are standalones, they count as a district, but they're not the same thing as like a huge county system. But in the district, you've got a school district or board. So the school board is made up of individuals who are responsible for, again, implementing the law, interpreting the law, and deciding how it's going to best serve the children in that district. Often these are elected. School board members are almost always elected, and you'll notice that at election time. So-and-so is running for school board seat, whatever, and then your county is divided up into districts and stuff like that. The superintendent reports to the school board. So depending on the district, and every county makes their own laws for this, the school board either appoints the superintendent or a superintendent is elected. If you were in Tallahassee in November and you paid attention at all, maybe if you were under a rock, I get it, you might have not noticed. But this past fall, we had a superintendent election, and we had our longtime superintendent, Jackie Pons, running against a new candidate, Rocky Hanna, and Rocky won. So honestly, for the first time in a long time, we've kind of upset the balance in our school district, and people are still wondering like what's going to happen with changes down the road, because it's a big change. Like we just had a big change in our leadership in our district schools here. So time will tell. The superintendent answers to the school board and is kind of like the direct supervisor of the principals. So if you notice, my graphic is not perfect, but I have state DOE immediately pointing to the district, the school board, because that's kind of who they report to. That's who comes next in the chain. And then the superintendent kind of comes under the school board because that's who they report to. And then if I hop back up here, I've got principals. And the principal, I think you understand what a principal is. Their job is to be the educational leader in the school. They're supposed to have a strong understanding of curriculum and instruction. And they're also like the people manager for the teachers. So they kind of liaison between the district office and the school. They work at the school because that's their primary place. But when you're a principal, it's very normal to like go to the district office for meetings and stuff throughout the week. Assistant principals will have a specific area that they're assigned to very commonly, depending on how big the school is. So if you choose any school on Leon County's website and look at it, you'll see the principal, and then you'll see the assistant principal, and sometimes it says of. So I know when I was in high school, and maybe you too, we had an assistant principal of instruction, we had an assistant principal of administration, and an assistant principal of discipline. The discipline one was scary. But, you know, they have like their assigned areas of specialty, and of course they report to the principal. At Ayla School, there's an assistant principal of curriculum and instruction, and then an assistant principal of administration, and that's like this broad category that includes things like she does everything from making sure that the teachers have computers that work to that paperwork online is functioning and answering questions probably about like time off and stuff like that. And then down here, I've got community, and we'll come back to that in a second. So these four things, superintendent, school board, principal, assistant principal, these are all potential resources for teachers. And this is where our focus is in this classroom. This is frontline, working with kids. Yes, there's policies from the Fed and policies from the state, and it trickles down, trickles down, trickles down. And someone gives you somewhere a checklist or a package or whatever of this is what you need to teach in your classroom. This is what fourth graders in Florida learn. This is what fifth graders who have special needs in Florida learn. And you're the teacher who's actually using that information and taking what you know about your students. So you've got like all these resources that are given to you, and then you've got this group of kids, and you have to figure out how they're going to come together, and you're going to make it work in your classroom. So in ways, you're kind of like artists. That's kind of cool. My computer just went black, so I just pressed a button. I don't know if you guys saw that in the video or not. Okay, community is also a big important piece of organization of schools. Community members support individual schools. Businesses support schools. There is an entity that the legislature requires for failing schools called a school advisory council. And there was a time when only failing schools were required to have one. It was a pretty short time. Now they're very common. Most schools have a school advisory council, and there's rules for how the council is set up. They also can be called a community assessment team, or a CAT. And it'll be something like, the community assessment team has to include the principal, and a certain percentage of teachers and community members, and only so many parents. And we can just make up an assessment. Like, it has to have the principal, it has to have 2 teachers from the school, and it has to have, the rest can only be like 50% parents and 50% community members. So, and maybe the school decides that they're going to have 10 seats. So that would be a principal and 2 teachers, that's 3, and then 7 seats. So you would give like 3 to parents and then 4 to community members or whatever. But their purpose, those groups, are to analyze data from the school. So when they get that testing data back, they analyze data and they make recommendations for things that can happen at the school. And it's everything from how they can better utilize their money to how they can move kids around. So, and recognize maybe teachers who are struggling. Did every kid in this one teacher's class do badly on the test? And if that's the case, then maybe this teacher needs some extra support and some professional development, stuff like that. Parents are obviously a big part of the school system, and in best case scenario, they are solid partners who work with the teacher to move the kids forward. Worst case scenario, they are not involved at all and are very hard to reach and stuff like that. You will have all kinds of parents, and I don't need to go into that too much further. We've talked about that before. And then right here, I have the students listed because the students are the goal of all of these people, and that's why this looks like a funnel. We are there for the students. Is it possible to lose sight of being there for students? Absolutely. It happens. Teachers get burned out. We've talked about this. A lot of teachers leave the profession. Teachers are human beings. If you've taught for 30 years and you're 1 year out from retirement, you might not be sharp as a tack or super into it your last year because you're thinking about what you're going to do when you retire. And you are a human being. You have things that happen to you and things that happen to people you love and all that stuff. But the students are who we are there for at the end of the day. I know that for me, I teach at TCC because I care about working with young people. And that's that. All right, so this ended up being a heck of a lot longer than I originally planned. Thank you for listening, and I will leave you more instructions in either another video or just in the text below. Happy Saturday.